Let's open up our Bibles to the book of Judges, chapter 9. As you're turning there, I want to give you an unfortunate introduction, kind of a sad commentary. Let me tell you about three things that have happened just in the last 3 years. Some even more, really recent, but all three in the last 3 years. A pastor in Harford County, Maryland, was discovered to have embezzled $135,000 from his church. A very well-known pastor of Hillsong Church in New York City was caught in moral failure just within 2 years. One of the most well-respected biblical expositors, like solid preaching of the Word in a church in Dallas, Texas, just this past year admitted having a 5-year affair and is now no longer leading the church. Those are three pretty prominent stories about pastors that have made the news. But what about less prominent pastors with perhaps less conspicuous sins? What about the pastor who is always angry? What about the pastor who has trouble leading his family by example? What about the pastor who, for whatever reason, has difficulty being honest? Those don't usually make the news. Bless you. But they are just as harmful to the kingdom. They're just as harmful to the church. And what I believe, just my perspective, I believe that many people, maybe more than I realize, in local churches, especially in our nation, in the Christian context, I don't think many people really understand many of the challenges or difficulties in being a pastor. And I think a byproduct of that is oftentimes pastors, leaders in the church context are put on some kind of imaginary pedestal as if they don't struggle with the same things other people struggle with. They don't have to deal with the same things that other people deal with. They can't possibly understand the stuff I'm going through, right? That's nonsense. That is complete nonsense. I can tell you from personal experience, my perspective looking out at all of you is that I have it as bad or worse than any of you with respect to trying to follow Jesus and trying to live the life I know He wants me to live, and trying to be faithful to His Word, and be a good example in my home, and be a good example in the church, and try to meet everybody's needs, and to do the things that everybody needs done, and that's exhausting. And it's not easy. And every time I read a news story like this, especially someone more prominent that makes the news, every time I read that, and I think I may be similar to other people, when many people read those things and their first instinct reaction could be, well, I just can't believe he did that. Or I cannot believe he would go down that road. Or I can't believe he would act that way. Really? Is it that shocking? Does he have some kind of special force field around him that everybody else doesn't have? Because he's a pastor or a preacher or a seminary professor or whatever, fill in the blank. There's no special treatment among God's people. There's no favoritism among God's people. And I will tell you from firsthand experience, if you have heard or you think that because you are following Jesus, your life is going to somehow become better and easier, someone has lied to you. The Christian life is not all rose gardens and rainbows and all this. Listen to me. As soon as you come to Jesus and you decide, I am devoting my life to following Jesus, as soon as you do that and you mean it for real, your life's about to go crazy. It's about to get really hard because you will have put a target on your back. You may have been previously unrecognizable to the enemy, but no more. The more you follow Jesus, the more difficult it becomes to follow Jesus. Enter Abimilech. Character counts. That's the name of the message today. And there's 57 verses in this chapter, so I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but I am going to point out some verses that I believe will give us the necessary context to see what's happening. Character counts. That is a summary statement that describes what's happening in this chapter and why it's so important. So let me first of all just read to you the first 6 verses in chapter 9 to set the stage. Here's what's happening. Gideon has just died. The land has experienced rest for 40 years. And now this is following Gideon's death. Okay, and here's what happens beginning in chapter 9. Now Abimilech, the son of Jerubbaal, that's Gideon, that's his other name, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives and said to them and to the whole clan of the mother's family, say in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal rule over you, or that one rule over you? And remember also, I'm your bone and your flesh. And his mother's relatives spoke all these words on his behalf in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimilech, for they said, he's our brother. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal-berith. By the way, the house of Baal-berith, that's an idol that they're worshiping. Okay, don't miss that. They gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal-berith, with which Abimilech hired worthless and reckless fellows who followed him, and he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he had hid himself. And all the leaders of Shechem came together, and all Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar at Shechem. So you see what just happened? Now let me tell you about who Abimelech is. He is also one of Gideon's sons. But the 70 sons that he just killed were all sons of Gideon's wives. Abimelech was the son of a concubine of Gideon. Here's what you should get in your mind. Do you remember what happened when Abraham and Sarah had Isaac and Ishmael? And Isaac was the son of the free woman, and Ishmael was the son of the slave woman. And you know what's happening in the Middle East today? You know why they're fighting? Why they've been fighting for thousands of years? Isaac and Ishmael. And you see what just happened. So Abimelech, that's who he is. He is still technically a son of Gideon, but he manipulates his family on his mother's side and convinces them, a little drive-by guilt trip, oh, don't forget, I'm your relative, I'm your family. You need to support me. And he convinces them to speak to the leadership of Shechem to make him king, because he says, well, do you want all 70 sons of Gideon ruling over you, or just me? Seems like I remember reading in Proverbs that there is wisdom in many counselors. But that's just me. So money that was given to Abimmelech from false gods was spent on contract killers. And so Abimmelech basically went to his father's house, killed all his half-brothers, and assumed leadership, persuading the people to make him king. Now Gideon's youngest son, Jotham, he escaped from this murderous plot. And he told the people of Shechem a parable about the dangers of bad leadership. So if you were to read from verse 7 all the way down to verse 16 or 15, you would see this parable that he tells to try to illustrate this point. I'm going to try to save some time here and just read some verses in the story to help you understand. But Jotham basically explained the implications of this parable to the people. He said, you need to examine your treatment of Gideon, my father, and his family. And if you were faithful and honest, then that's acceptable. But if you were not faithful and honest, fire is going to consume you for your wickedness. So the first thing that we have observed here in this chapter through Abimmelech is that ungodly leadership lacks character and integrity. And this seems like negative truth, and it kind of is. But it's important to see the negative so you can understand where to go from there. Ungodly leadership lacks character and integrity. So Abimmelech has basically embodied that truth. And this parable that Jotham told the people, I mean, he went up on a mountain and shouted this from the mountaintop. So let me read the end of that paragraph just to help you see the actions that are going on here. From verse 16, Jotham says, now, therefore, if you acted in good faith and integrity when you made Abimmelech king, and if you dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, that's Gideon, his father, and have done to him as his deeds deserved. Now, what's he talking about there? His deeds. What does his deeds deserve? Well, from verse 17 to 18, he basically gives a summary. He said, my daddy fought for y'all. He defeated Midian for y'all. He did a lot of good things for y'all, so you should have treated him well and his family well out of respect. That's what he's saying. That's what his plea here. When you get to verse 19, if then you've acted in good faith and integrity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimmelech. Let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out from Abimmelech and devour the leaders of Shechem and Beth Millo. And let fire come out from the leaders of Shechem and from Beth Millo and devour Abimmelech. And then Jotham ran away and fled because of his brother. So you see what's happening. It's a terrible, terrible picture. But let me just point this out before we move to the last point. Is that really a whole lot different than things happening today? Political plots, underhanded plans. I want to be in charge, so I'm going to make sure these people are killed. I mean, that happened. What's the meme that's been going around for like 2 years now? Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself. Right? There's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of political problems. A lot of underhanded things in our government and in our society. And guess what? This right here is a political play. That's all it is. This brother wanted to be king and not these brothers. And so he convinced some people, told some lies, played the family card, and then he killed his opposition. That's what happened. That's ungodly leadership. That's no character. That is no integrity. And that's unfortunately, the characteristics of those who lead in this type of way. Now, the second point, the balance of this chapter shows us this truth. Ungodly leadership brings consequence and punishment. And let me just point out, it may not be today. It may not be next week. But ungodly leadership always has consequences. It was 3 years into Abimelech's rule that the punishment began. So you can imagine, 3 years into this, he might have been thinking, not sure, but he might have been thinking, how about that? I got away with it. My little plan worked. Smooth sailing here. I'm in charge. Have been for 3 years. Yeah, well, look what happened after that. In verse 22, you see Abimelech ruled over Israel 3 years. But look at verse 23. Let me read to you these two verses, 23 and 24. God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem. And the leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. 3 years. 3 years. Now you might be thinking about that, and you think, okay, well, what's the significance there? Well, here's the significance. God is not blind. God sees. God sees things you think he doesn't see. God knows things you would prefer him not to know. Nothing escapes his glance. There's nothing. Did it ever occur to you that nothing ever occurs to God? He just knows. So we can fool everybody in the room. We can even lie to ourselves and tell ourselves a story that we eventually believe because we just want it to be true. But guess what? God is never fooled by any of our nonsense. Ever. And I read Hebrews 10 as we were observing the Lord's Supper. I read a passage out of there about devotion to God, and since we've received these promises, and because we've been sprinkled clean by the blood of Christ. Well, I stopped short of the last two verses of that paragraph, and they seem pretty appropriate right now. In Hebrews chapter 10, beginning in verse 30 and going to verse 31, here's what the Bible says. We know him who has said, vengeance is mine, I will repay. And again, the Lord will judge his people. God knows what's happening. And God, unlike man, has perfect knowledge, perfect justice, and, don't forget this one, perfect timing. You think God is just, God, why hadn't you helped me? God, why hadn't you dealt with this problem? Why hadn't you dealt with this opposition that I'm dealing with? You ever ask those questions? What are you waiting on? How much more of this do I have to deal with? Meanwhile, God is on his throne. And he knows your circumstance. And he knows your challenges. And he has everything well in hand. Because he has a timetable that is not ours. If you need some encouragement, jot this down. Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9. It's a tremendous encouragement to help us remember we might see things and know things, but we don't see it all and we don't know it all. Isaiah 55, verse 8. My thoughts are not your thoughts. Neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. Just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. God knows. God sees. And believe me when I say, based on Scripture, God can handle it. He can handle it. So 3 years into Abimelech's rule, God does this thing. He sends this evil spirit to bring judgment on Abimelech and the people of Shechem. He's claiming vengeance on Gideon's behalf. And guess what? Gideon's not even alive anymore. And now his 70 sons have been murdered with no one to defend their honor. Guess what? God defends their honor. God handles the situation. There's conflict between Abimelech and the people of Shechem. Verse 29. God raises up Gaal, son of Ebed, to come against Abimelech in this insurrection, and he plans to overthrow the government and assume leadership. And then Abimelech's chief officer facilitates this little coup. This is all in the... I want to save time by not reading all this, but this is what's happening. Abimelech's officer facilitates this coup against the government. Everything falls apart. Gaal flees away. Abimelech pursues him. There's chaos. But here's what's happening. When you get to verse 38, everything seems to be going well for Abimelech because he's being victorious on the battlefield. He's squashing this little insurrection against his authority. He thinks everything is going great, and he thinks he's going to be successful in everything he does. So when you get to verse 38, Zebul says to Gaal, the guy who was plotting this insurrection, he goes, "Where's your mouth now? Who is Abimelech that we should serve him?" is what you said. "Aren't these people whom you despised? Why won't you fight them?" He flees. So everything falls apart. And Abimelech believes, at this point, he's had like 3 successful battles, and he believes he's going to be successful. He believes that he is unstoppable. If you read verse 45 and verse 49, respectively, Abimelech fought against this city all that day. He captured the city, killed the people who were in it. He leveled the city and sowed it with salt. Verse 49, every one of the people cut down the bundle of wood. They followed Abimelech, put it against the stronghold. They set it on fire. All the people of the tower of Shechem also died, about 1,000 men and women. So at this point, we're getting to the end of the chapter, and Abimelech thinks, I got this handled. God's not going to do anything to me. You ever said that? You know what that reminds me of? This is random. This reminds me of a certain engineering group that was responsible for the construction of a well-known ship called the Titanic. And they are quoted historically as saying, God himself couldn't sink this ship. Oh, really? How'd that work out for you? Abimelech thinks he is unstoppable. So he goes on to his next battle, and he gets close to the tower. He's going to burn it down just like he's done the previous 2, except for this one little detail that he missed. There's a woman standing up at the top of the tower with a great big old stone. And she just pushes that thing over the edge, and it lands on Abimelech and mortally wounds him. Now the man who thought he could do no wrong and thought his plot had succeeded and thought he was going to be king forever and everything was going his way until a woman dropped a rock on his head. And now it's not looking so good. So you know what he does? He does typically what bullies do when you stand up to them. They go running away with their tail between their legs. Abimelech cries out for mercy to his armor bearer and says, I can't have anybody knowing that a woman killed me, so you got to kill me. Go ahead and just take your sword and get it over with. I can't have this getting out, this story. He's more concerned about what little reputation he has left than just being a man and owning his mistakes. Because remember, he's an ungodly leader. He lacks character. He lacks integrity. And now he's suffering the consequences and punishment for his actions. So at the end, that verse 53 is where the millstone is thrown onto him. Verse 55, his armor bearer kills him. And it's just so almost like nonchalant what happens at the end of this story. When you get to verse 55, When the men of Israel saw that Abimmelech was dead, everyone went home. Oh, okay. I guess the battle's over. He's dead, so everyone departed to his house. Now, that's the end of the story, but it's not the end of our story. Because this is a personal application, maybe even a corporate application that I think is helpful for us to remember. Eric Redmond wrote this quote. I'm going to read this quote to you. When looking for leaders of God's people, what a person claims about his or her own ability is not enough to make a person a leader. Oh, that's not the quote. That's later. Sorry. You can go back to the outline. When looking for leaders of God's people, what a person claims about his or her own ability is not enough to make a person a leader. Leading God's people is, in fact, leading people who are at war with supernatural enemy forces for the establishment of God's rule on the earth. And those who lead must be able to bring about victories for God's people in the work of the ministry. Their track records should have evidence of leading God's people successfully. They should be more than just talk. So you know what this made me think of? You know what I was able to do before I got called to ministry, like 25 years ago? I was actually on a pastor search committee. One time in my life. 25 years ago. And you know what I learned that I still remember? That I've seen over and over in other churches and other teams? It's really easy to make yourself look stellar on paper. Anybody can make a really good resume. So you know what I figured out? When people would supply references, here, call these 3 or 4 or 5 people, and they'll tell you how wonderful I am. Well, you know what I would do? I would call whoever I was supposed to call, and then I'd ask that person, hey, do you know anybody else I could call? And they'd give me some names that weren't on the paper. And everybody did that. So we went 2 and 3 deep into references. Not just the people they told us to call who were going to sing their praises, but some people, hopefully, that would just give us an objective viewpoint. And we found out some more stuff, you know. Maybe stuff they didn't want us to find out. But you know what? This is true in pastor search. It's true in hiring of staff. There's 3 things I think of in my mind when thinking about hiring someone. Character, competence, and chemistry. If they don't pass the character test, I don't care about the other 2. If they pass the character test, they got to be able to do the job. If they can do those 2 things, if they have good character and they're competent, then how do they fit? And I've not always hit 100% on that, but that's important. I've seen it. I've seen what happens when that's not paid attention to. When you got somebody who's super good at their job and got good character, just not a fit. Just not a fit. And so it's important for us to think about those things. So these last 2 verses of chapter 9 give us the ending of this saga of ungodly leadership. And so look at the last 2 verses, 56 and 57. This kind of concludes the whole ordeal. So God returned the evil of Abimilech, which he committed against his father in killing his 70 brothers. And God also made all the evil of the men of Shechem return on their own heads. And upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. So that whole parable that Jotham told them, it came true. They did suffer the consequences of their actions. So God saw and God dealt with it. And this leads us to this last statement. Judges 9 intends for the reader to understand that an implication of the gospel is that it matters to the Lord that people of God-fearing character lead his people. And you might think this is kind of obvious, that you need to have a godly leader for God's church. You would think it would be obvious, right? Like it kind of goes without saying. But you know what tells us a different story? All the churches who are without pastors because they didn't spend much time on learning about someone they call to be their pastor. And so it doesn't work out, and they leave because they didn't learn. They didn't get to know. You know, they looked at a resume. They heard a recording. And he's a good preacher. Let's get him. And then listen. I need to just say this. Two things. One, this is not just for leadership. This is for Christians. This is like what we see as Christians. We think you've got to be a super Christian to be a leader. No, just be a Christian. Read the Bible, what it says, just to be a Christian. This is not radical behavior to follow Jesus and do what he says. You know why it seems radical to us? Because nobody's really doing it. And that's what makes leaders look like extra special when they're not. They're just struggling through it day to day too, trying to follow Jesus. Every one of us should be following hard after Jesus, should be staying in the Word and doing our best to be obedient to what he tells us. And here's the other thing. The last thing. I don't have it all together. Not even close. And before you think I do, maybe you should pray two things. Maybe you should pray, one, that your perspective will be adjusted to reality. And then two, pray for me that I get my act together. And I say that, I'm not trying to give you some kind of false humility. That's not what this is about. I know it could sound like that, but that's not what's happening. What I'm trying to communicate as clearly as possible is this. I don't know what you really think of me, but I know me better than you do. And I don't have it all together. I need help and encouragement and prayers just as much or more than anybody else in here. And so I want to make sure everybody understands that the pastor as a position and as a person is not super Christian. They are one beggar trying to show other beggars where to get the bread. And that's all we're doing. And we all need Jesus to do that. I pray for you. I need you to pray for me. I try to be encouraging to all of you. And I need you to try to encourage me. We all need each other for that. I put something on my social media just the other day that said a pastor can only help you grow in your life if you show up. But that goes both ways. So just know, I'm praying for you. And I hope you're praying for me. Because we ought to be praying for each other. Because in a context of church and a world where character really does count and matter, none of us is where we should be. We've all got work to do, and we all need each other to help each other out with that. That make sense? All right, let me pray.